Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Melissa DeRosa, Democratic strategist and former secretary under Governor Andrew Cuomo. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
I love getting to talk to you throughout this election cycle because every conversation, there's a different tenor, there's a different historical event that happened, and the same can be said for this conversation today because you and I spoke the day after the Biden-Trump debate, and the mood from Democrats was really somber. It was this reckoning. It almost felt like a mourning. Now, after the debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, what are you feeling?
Look, today is a little bit of a strange day because of coming off of what happened yesterday. It almost feels wrong to talk about politics, but here's what I will say. She 100% won the debate. He failed at his number one mission on that stage, which was to show the world that she is failed and incompetent and dangerously liberal, which is the whole slogan, right? That's his entire mantra about her. She got up on that stage, and that's not what the country saw. And so he failed on that debate stage. The big question is, what are the effects of that going to be going into November? And this was something I touched on a column on I wrote last week in the Daily Beast, which was Hillary Clinton, too, wiped the floor with Donald Trump in the first general election debate by all measurable standards. And we all know how that ended. And so I think right now there is jubilation from a lot of the talking heads. I am taking the attitude that we can be cautiously optimistic, but always run like we're 10 points behind.
Yeah, you, in your piece, told Democrats to put the champagne away. Explain that thinking.
So again, Hillary Clinton, and you and I were just chatting before we started, 2016, I tell this anecdote in the piece I wrote last week that I was at Javits the night that Hillary Clinton famously lost. And, everything about that night, they had picked Javits because of the glass ceiling, the gorgeous glass ceiling of that convention center, the symbolism of the first woman to become president of the United States shattering through that glass ceiling. And then my former boss and I pulled up. He was part of the pre-program to speak to introduce Secretary Clinton on what we thought was going to be this historic occasion. And as we pull up, we see the New York Times predictor needle swing from Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump. And we had this moment. I think a lot of people had this moment, like, I can't believe this is happening. And I called someone inside the campaign and said, what do we do? Because he had prepared remarks, framing this historic moment where the first woman was going to become president of the United States. And the campaign said to us, pretend like it isn't happening, give the speech he's prepared to give, we'll see how it goes. And that moment really stays with me. It stuck with me through a lot of 2020 with Biden, although that was totally different circumstances. It certainly is sticking with me now. And one of the things I think Democrats, strategists, talking heads, voters in general should understand is the Electoral College naturally favors Republicans. The makeup of the Electoral College favors Republicans. And when you look at 2016, Hillary Clinton won the general popular vote by 2.2 points, but she lost by a point and a half in the swing states. Joe Biden won the popular vote by 4.5 points. He only won the Electoral College, the swing states, by 1.5 points. So what you really see is a 3-point deficit that Democrats have had consistently in the last several elections. And so when you see polls and you see Kamala Harris up between 2 and 4, 2 and 5 points, I don't sleep well. And that's sort of what everyone needs to internalize as we're going through the next 50 days.
So even after that last debate, you're still not sleeping well because all polls indicate how tight of a race this is. So when you're looking back at 2016, what do you think Democrats need to do now in the less than 60 days to the election to ensure that that doesn't happen again and they get the results that they want?
Well, it's funny because I feel like you and I have been having a version of this conversation for the last several months. Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. And that is the one state, when you look at that electoral college map, that is so key to victory. And one of the things that after 2016, a lot of operatives looked back and said that Hillary didn't spend the right amount of time and the right amount of money in the right places in order to clearly win. And at the end of the day, this is about winning and losing. So great. Go spend money in places like Florida and Texas. It's wonderful that some people are saying that those are swing states. They're not swing states. At the end of the day, they're going to end up in Trump's column. Focus on where we need to win. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. And, looking back, if God forbid we lose, I think there's going to be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking saying if only she had picked Shapiro. And so I think that we need to understand that vulnerability right now. She should camp out there. She should send every popular surrogate that she's got there. Biden's very popular in that state. Use him where you can and just focus on making sure that we've got that map locked on election day.
So let's say you're a voter in Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, and let's say you're a disenfranchised Republican or an undecided voter. Do you think Kamala Harris's performance at all changed their hearts and minds to vote for her in November?
I think that what she did was she cleared the bar in appearing presidential. She was substantive. She demonstrated a range and depth on major geopolitical and policy issues. She was polished. She was poised. She looked the part. And so to the extent that people are still feeling any hesitation about voting for her, I think that debate gave them some comfort, that they would feel good voting for her. But those critical undecided voters in those 7 states still aren't sold yet, or at least not in big enough numbers. And so I think that the next 50 days is really going to be about talking to pocketbook issues, inflation. We got some good numbers on that last week. How are we going to handle border security? How are we going to make sure that families in this country can thrive? There's more economic opportunity, et cetera. And sort of let Donald Trump continue to implode. I mean, he's the gift that keeps on giving. You have him at the debate, by contrast, talking about migrants eating cats and dogs, and then a week-long cycle on this debate as to whether or not it's true, and his vice presidential candidate goes out with Dana Bash and essentially confirms that they made it up in order to get people talking about the migrant issue. Saturday, he puts out this, tweet, I hate Taylor Swift. It just makes him look completely unhinged and sort of like the boy who has the crush on the girl that, isn't paying him any attention. And so he's lashing out. And so, I think that, not to be crass about it, but this assassination attempt yesterday does allow his campaign a moment pause, reboot. I think that you're going to see the Harris folks, take their foot off the gas in terms of attacking him out of respect for the situation. It would look bad. There is going to be, who knows, maybe 24, 48, maybe even 72 hours where they're very focused on who was the shooter, what were the issues with the Secret Service, how did they allow this to happen again? You could see some rallying from the base. I anticipate he's going to see some money come in on online donations. And so perhaps this is a moment for him to get his act together and never waste a crisis, as they say. Stop hanging out with Laura Loomer, get it together. So again, cautious optimism. It feels like it's going in the right direction for her. He is doing all of the exact wrong things, but 50 days is a long time.
To your earlier point, this election will be coming down to those pocketbook issues. And there are 2 questions that work in Trump's favor. One being of, when asked to Kamala Harris, what do you say to people when the prices of everyday goods were lower in the Trump administration opposed to the Biden-Harris administration? And, hey, your policies sound great. Why haven't they been implemented in the past 3.5 years? How do you think she answered those questions on the debate stage? And what further explaining does she have to do in the next 60 days or so to get those undecided votes, especially in those battleground states?
I think that she handled them well enough, particularly when you juxtapose Donald Trump, who's saying, I've got plans to make plans, or whatever that crazy line was. And so I think that she handled it enough, but she's not there yet. She's going to have to put more meat on the bones. I think there's going to be an interest rate cut coming, pretty imminently, which will work in her favor. If we continue to see that inflation number tick down, she's got to hope that some of the stuff that's directly out of her control, those arrows go in the right direction. But this can't just be the usual Democratic talking points of we're going to raise taxes on the wealthy and the corporations, because frankly, that doesn't do anything to help you. And this question is, what have you done for me lately? Just because you're going to extract pain from the wealthy or from corporate America doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help me. And so those are the kinds of things that she's going to really need to speak to. And it's been interesting because you saw Donald Trump go out and say, when he was in Nevada some weeks back, I'm not going to tax tips. And it was a concrete proposal that really energized people. And then you sort of saw her get on board with that. And I think she's going to need to come up with more things like that are very concrete, that affect a particular constituency, specifically in those 7 battleground states.
She picked up a few endorsements over the past week and a half or so. Two being from the Cheneys, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, as well as former Vice President Dick Cheney. After the debate, Taylor Swift came out and endorsed her, not only endorsed her, had a jab at J.D. Vance, called herself a childless cat lady. In your time in politics, how much do endorsements help, especially if it's from a celebrity or even from the opposite party? Does that affect the undecided voter? Does that affect turnout at all?
Taylor Swift obviously has a little bit of a cult-like following, and so I put her in a separate category. She could actually genuinely energize some of the youth vote. We did see voter registration numbers. I think they said a few 100,000 people registered to vote off of her tweets and her endorsements. Now, which states are those in? Is that actually impactful in terms of swing states? Do those people turn out? I'm yet to be sold on that. But I do think that in terms of momentum, it's all important, right? It just keeps everyone. I've always said that polls are important not for what they say, but for what they project. People want to be with a winner. When they feel like it's groupthink, it's natural, it's lemmings. When people feel like something is moving in a direction and that thing is moving and that's going to be a winner, human instinct is to want to be on that board. So that's where I think endorsements are important. I think it's helpful in media cycles. I think the more she can show Republicans, and by the way, Dick Cheney is not, a right of center Republican. He is a neocon. And so I think the more she can show Republicans are with her, the more it gives Republicans permission to vote for her, the more it gives independents permission to say, oh, wait, this isn't just the far left as Donald Trump wants you to believe. This is left, right, and center. I think it helps those people sort of move along. But I think on their own, they don't do that much.
I know you said as a Democrat you're cautiously optimistic after watching that debate. But as we saw in June, the debate between Biden and Trump, that was the beginning of the end for President Biden's campaign. How much do you think this debate will impact or affect the election in November?
I think what we saw in June was an historic moment. Debates usually don't define an election. That debate changed the course of history. And so that is something, that people will talk about for centuries to come. This debate was more important in that Donald Trump didn't do what he needed to do in terms of, stopping her momentum, painting her in a certain way, defining her as this dangerously, like liberal, weak, incompetent person. So it was important for that. But overall, we didn't see a big bounce coming out of the debate either way. She obviously is a comfortable amount ahead in that ABC Ipsos poll that we saw over the weekend. When you do the likely voter screen, she's up over 50, which is critically important. But look, we're not there yet. And that's going to be the one and only debate that we're going to have this cycle. The one thing I always think about is Hillary Clinton was up double digits in September in 2016. In the CNN Snap poll after the Harris-Trump debate, 37% of Americans said that Trump won that debate. In the CNN Snap poll after the Trump-Clinton debate, only 24% of Americans said that Trump won the debate. So it's important to keep those historical benchmarks in mind when we're analyzing these things in real time as things are moving. This thing is far from over. Trump's electorate is historically really difficult to pin down in polling. And then you have another major event every 7 seconds, it feels like another attempted assassination happening yesterday. That will impact the next several cycles. News cycles. That will impact his fundraising. That will impact how Kamala Harris and her surrogates attack him. And so, this whole thing is very fluid, which is why I always say, run like you're 10 points behind. It's the only way you're going to get ahead.
I do now want to pivot to some New York specific news. As someone who worked in New York politics, I would love to get your reaction. New York City Mayor Eric Adams' administration has found itself in the midst of multiple federal investigations. There have been federal searches on multiple NYC officials. The NYPD commissioner and Mayor Eric Adams' chief counsel both resigned. What's your reaction to that news?
Look, I have a lot of really close friends that work in that administration. And as a New Yorker, first and foremost, I want Eric Adams to succeed, because if he succeeds, the city does well. There's no sugarcoating how bad this is. From a political standpoint, there's the political standpoint, governmental standpoint, and the legal standpoint. From the political standpoint, Eric Adams was already polling, in the upper 20s as of a couple of months ago, the last time they did citywide polling. So he starts without a real base of support while he's sort of weathering this storm. So politically, this is very bad for him. He's at a point now where he's got a number of people who've thrown their hat in the ring to challenge him in 2025 for his mayoralty. People will talk about how de Blasio was such a train wreck. De Blasio never faced a significant challenger in his primary when he was running for re-election. So already we're seeing a totally different dynamic sort of take hold. So that's the political side. Governmentally, when these investigations are closing in the way that they are, where you've got 4 different federal investigations into City Hall alone, a whole range of issues, to say nothing for the police department. As someone who's worked at the highest levels of government, where my mind goes is, how is it functioning? How are decisions getting made? How are you able to move the ball forward? Are things getting bottlenecked? Are things not getting done? Can people really truly focus? And so from a governmental perspective, it's, concerning as a taxpayer, as a resident. And the question for, Eric Adams and what he needs to do while he's facing this is, how do I show the people that the city is not being impacted by this? And then legally speaking, it's just all pointing to, this is not well. And who it touches and how far reaching it goes, how high up it goes, that remains to be seen. Everyone should be afforded due process. And jumping the gun is not something that I urge people to do. But there is a certain amount of reality. The bar is incredibly high to get search warrants. They got search warrants on a number of his top aides, his closest aides in City Hall, the police commissioner. Now the police commissioner has resigned. His top counsel, Lisa Zornberg, who used to be the head of the criminal division for the Southern District of New York, late night resignation on Saturday was sort of an earthquake shaking the New York political world. Everyone's sort of guessing, what does that mean? And so, again, I don't want to speculate on where it's going to go, but it certainly doesn't look good.
To your point, everyone is guessing where that leads, and we don't know where exactly yet as we sit here today, Monday afternoon. But how does Mayor Adams inspire confidence and lead in spite of all of this?
Look, one of the stories I just read was that his counsel resigned because she had recommended that he fire a number of people who it looks like are blatantly caught up in some very questionable behavior. And questionable, I'm using as very, toned down word, potentially illegal, city for sale type stuff, and that he's not taking her advice. And it took, a week to get the police commissioner to resign. And you had the New York Post, who has sort of been Eric Adams' #1 backer and supporter, saying the police commissioner's got to go. I think he's got to rid himself of some of this baggage. And this is not about a loyalty test right now. This is what I was just saying. Can the city function? Can the police department function? And I would argue that people who are having their homes raided, it's really difficult that they go to their job and, perform the way that they need to in those jobs, which are 24-hour-a-day, highly demanded positions. I would say at a certain point, you should ask for a few resignations. You've got to be out doing 2, 3, 4 events a day, showing the public that you're working for them, delivering actual results, not just giving speeches. And I would sit down and do interviews. Because at a certain point, you've got to start talking to the press, because the void and the vacuum that is left just leaves everyone guessing, and then it brings everything to a worse place. So that's what I think he needs to be doing.
Do you think there's going to be a point now or in the future where he should step down?
That's not something for me to say. I mean, this will be, I think that he would have to make that decision on his own if he feels he can no longer effectively govern. At the end of the day, we are people that serve in positions in public service. Those positions are not yours forever. You are not entitled to those positions. You are put in a place of power in order to put the public over yourself. If there comes a point where he can no longer effectively serve and he looks himself in the mirror and acknowledges that, that would be, what his decision is. But I think that it's premature to speculate about that at this point. And I also think at a certain point, the feds have got to move. You know, it's what they've allowed to spill out into the public has made it impossible for City Hall and for the NYPD to function. So at this point, either say you've done the investigation and there's no there, and allow everybody to move on without this cloud over their head, or start to arrest people and put together the case and show the public what it is that's going on so people can start to make decisions. Because this has now been almost a year of this. And I think it's reached a point of not being tenable.
I know you said earlier that there are some names being tossed around to primary the mayor. One of those names that have been thrown out potentially to run is former Governor Andrew Cuomo. What do you think about that?
You know, listen, it's funny you mentioned it. My phone has been ringing off the hook the last, couple of days with people saying he's got to run, he's got to run, he's got to run. We need an adult. He knows how to manage things. He built LaGuardia. He did gay marriage. He got the world through COVID. He certainly is hearing from a lot of people, and the people close to him are hearing from a lot of people. I think that, we've seen in polls that have been done publicly in the last 6 to 8 months that he would be the immediate front runner. He still maintains a massive well of support in New York City from New York City voters, despite how the administration ended. And so, that'll be a decision he has to make with his family. He's publicly said, this is something, he doesn't want to weigh in on until the picture gets a little bit clearer. He does have a nice relationship with the current mayor and has respect for him. So I think that, that remains to be seen. But there are certainly a lot of people pushing him too.
Well, Melissa, I always appreciate our conversations. There's always a historic moment that we can talk about. So thank you so much for coming in and weighing on it. I'm sure and I hope that I get to talk with you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brittany.